I understand we've just been joined by participants online. Hopefully everybody has received a couple of messages. One is to please keep your line muted, your Zoom call muted. And also we ask folk not to share their screens at this time. So if you can just turn your cameras off, that would be really helpful. Thank you. I think we've got a minute or so to go before the top of the hour. Although ironically, actually, the bell behind me, which is the bell of St. Paul's Cathedral in London, suggests that we've just about got there. Let me introduce myself, and then I'll, in a moment, hand over to our main speaker. So my name is Eamon Mullally. I'm one of the trustees of the the Pilgrims to Rome based here in London. And it's my very great privilege tonight to introduce our speaker, Sandy Brown. Just before Sandy comes and speaks, forgive me for boring you through some admin work, some admin topics, but what we would like to do is keep questions until after Sandy has finished his talk. There are two ways you can pose questions. One is that you'll be able to put them into the chat, and you can put them in the chat at any time. The second is to actually, at the end of the talk, when we're doing Q&A, is to put your hand up, or there's an icon, there's I think it's called a reaction, where you can put a hand up, and it shows an icon against your name. And when that happens, I'll do my very best to get them in order and invite people in. Looking at the numbers, the best way might be just to put your question into the chat, though, just because it might be easier. So without further ado, I'm very honored tonight to welcome the author of these three wonderful guides, Sandy Brown. And Sandy does more than just write guides. He actually walks the walk, and he kind of walks the talk. So Sandy, I'm going to hand over to you without further ado. I'm going to turn my camera off and let you make a further introduction for yourself.
Thank you so much, Eamon. And as I'm introducing myself, I'll share my screen as well so that you can see my content. Well, it's a real pleasure to be able to be here and do this reprise of the talk that I gave to the Confraternity gathering in Greenwich at the start of last month. I am a pilgrim walker, and that's actually the part that makes me the proudest. I do other things as well. I'm a travel business owner. I'm a United Methodist pastor, and I have a whole catalog of sermons that I preached over the years that you might, if you give me an opportunity, hear some pieces of it sometime. I love pilgrim walking. I was introduced to it thanks to Paulo Coelho's book, The Pilgrimage, in 1992. I did my first Camino de Santiago in 2008, and then I've kept walking almost every year since then. And I've had the privilege of walking the Francigena twice from Canterbury to Rome. One of those was a bike ride from Calais to Besançon, and that happened just last year. I'm really appreciative of the work of the Confraternity of Pilgrims to Rome. This group gave me my start, and I aspired to become a pilgrim to Rome. And I actually walked to Rome on the Via di Francesco first. And finally, I was able to begin my walking on the Francigena in 2016, with the walk from Piacenza to Rome. And I've been changed by this walk every step of the way. I've come to love it. And in fact, I loved it so much that I moved to be on it. So I live in Lucca, Italy, and almost every day in the season, I see Francigena pilgrims walking through town. I love it. I love the international aspect of it. People here in Lucca love it. They know about it. And Italians are very proud of it, as many other people along the way. As I begin, I want to share with you about my own challenge, and that is a few years ago, it became clear I was developing a version of motor neuron disease. It's affected my speaking. So I'm a little slower than I used to be because my tongue and my lips are not as responsive as they used to be. Well, what that means is, unlike in the past, I'm able to think ahead of what I'm going to say instead of just blathering on and talking before I've thought about it. As you can see in this slide, I'd like to talk about 5 quick tips for flourishing on the Via Francigena in France. And you see the date on the bottom right. That's the date of my presentation at Greenwich for the confraternity. And I call them quick tips because I think with this basic knowledge, people that follow these ideas will have an easier time, at least than I did my first time. I think also we tend to think of the stretch of the Francigena through France as difficult because of sparse infrastructure, especially. And I want to demythologize some of those myths that have been built around the Francigena. As I've enjoyed it in France, especially, I've come to really love what it is. So I should say, even before I begin, that I am building off of someone else's work. Well known in the confraternity was Alison Raju, and her 2-volume guide to the Francigena. It's been a mainstay for pilgrims for a long, long time. She was out pioneering this route as it was just being unfolded. She died a few years ago now, but everything that we have done at Cicerone Press, where I've worked the last few years on pilgrimage titles, has been an homage to Alison's earlier work. And so I tip my hat to her. As Eamon mentioned, the 3-volume set is now finished. And I created them in reverse order. On the right-hand side, Lucca to Rome first. That's the most traveled part of the Francigena. And then Lausanne and the Great St. Bernard Pass to Lucca, that came out just 3 months after that in 2021. And then I've just finished, and it was released in January in the UK, the Walking the Francigena Part 1, Canterbury to Lausanne. Now, you may already notice that this is divided into 3 volumes, and it was my idea, and I still believe it's a smart idea. The way it's traditionally been divided is from Canterbury to the top of the Great St. Bernard Pass. That's volume 1, as Allison and others have done it. And then the top of the Great St. Bernard Pass to Rome. Well, the problem with that, in my mind, is if you want to start, then you get the impression that you have to go to the top of the Great St. Bernard Pass to the second half. You can do that, it's fun, but then you miss some of the best days of the Via Francigena, which are climbing up the Alps from Lausanne. And I consider Lausanne, Lake Geneva, that walk around Montreux and then up the valley of the Rhone and the Drance and the Drance Entremont. I consider those to be stellar walks. And to give the impression that you've done most of the Francigena by just walking in Italy, I think that's the wrong thing to come away with. So every time I see somebody start the Francigena in Lausanne, I think, yay, this is working. They're seeing the two sides of the Great St. Bernard Pass. And I think that's wonderful. So book 1 then is Canterbury to Lausanne. And the biggest chunk of that, of course, is France. You're for nearly 1,000 kilometers in France. And we have come to believe that that's the difficult stretch. I want to give you a few tips along the way to help you survive, thrive, and flourish. So the first tip is to understand what is the difference and what is the combination of the French GR 145 and the Via Francigena. So you notice that little registered trademark sign there around the GR for the 145. What you need to understand to really understand the Francigena in France is it's a collaboration of two organizations. The one is the European Association Via Francigena, and the other is the Fédération Randonnaise of France, Randonnée, or Fédération Randonnée, as it's often called. This is a map of the GR routes in France. And you can see that the randonneurs, the Fédération, as it's called for short, has its hands full. And the way that works in France is if you're going to have an official trail, it has to be approved by that organization, the French Fédération Randonnée. You can find them at this website. There are 250,000 members, 3,500 clubs, 20,000 volunteers, and 180,000 kilometers of marked trails. In France, they're considered a public utility. It's not just a voluntary organization. So even as I produced that guidebook that Eamon showed, volume 1, that had to have the approval of the Fédération. And in fact, 7% of the gross sales of that book are returned to the Fédération. That's the hold that it has. And there was a handshake and a written agreement between the European Association of Via Francigena and the French Randonnée. So when you're walking the Francigena in France and you see one of these omnipresent signs, that's a sign that was put there by the Fédération. Not only does the Fédération approve the walk, it also maintains the walk. Now, the Fédération has its own goals in creating a walk. And the goal is that the walk is going to have only a maximum percentage on pavement. The rest is going to be on footpaths, soft trails, if possible, in the forest or in nature. So here's an example from my book of a state. This state begins in Richebourg, and it goes on the D102 road. Now, if you're at this point right here, you would see a Fédération yellow sign that says turn right. So you would then walk off the road through this wonderful forest, and you would continue and come to Abbaye de Montmont from the west side. Now, that achieves the Fédération goal of having some on dirt and in woods. But there's also the D102 road right here that connects it with a shorter distance. So if you look in this picture on the right-hand side, you see three people biking on a curvy road. That curve is this curve right here. Now look at this road. The cars don't go on this road very much. The A5 freeway is right there. It's a quiet backcountry road that happens to have two memorable trees there. And the Abbaye is somewhere over here. So as I wrote the book, I agreed with the EAVF, and this is the official guidebook of the EAVF, that I would always show the official route. But in the solid red line, I'm showing my recommendation to you. And that recommendation is based on my own experience going both ways. So I recommend you take the shorter walk. Now, it fits the Fédération's goals of a person having a nice nature walk to go that way. But if you're walking to Rome and you're worried about your number of days, then you want to have your route be as brief as you reasonably can make it. Speaking of which, tip number 2 is to plan your route in advance. So there are lots of distance-saving alternatives to the GO 145, and I'm going to show you some. Now, the time crunch comes for somebody that does not live in the Schengen zone in most of Europe. And Australians, Americans, Brits, thank you, Brexit, have a 90-day maximum in countries like France, Switzerland, and Italy. So if you look at the official stages in my book, you get 52 days in book 1, 32 in book 2, 18 in book 3. That's 102 days. But I assure you that if you study it carefully, you can smooth out these days and do it within the 90-day Schengen pass without even skipping ahead. And let me give you some examples. So this again is a map in the book. This is the next stage from the one I just mentioned. This is Orange. By the way, look at the infrastructure in Orange. There's only accommodation and a bus stop. That's what those two symbols mean. That means there's no restaurant, there's no grocery store, there's no bar. And so you are going to want to get your meals at the accommodation there in Orange, or bring your meal with you. It happens to be a chambre d'hôte there, that's the accommodation. So the official route takes you on a gravel road, and you go to the town of Châteauvillain, where there's lots of infrastructure. These symbols mean there's a restaurant, grocery store, accommodation, ATM, pharmacy, clinic, and tourist information office. Here's where the grocery store is at Châteauvillain. And so the official route takes you there, then takes you on a sort of zigzag route to the next stop, which is Richebourg. I'm sorry, this is the stop before. There's another way.
Det var virkelig mærkeligt nede ved fitnesscenteret.
I wanted to ask that everybody turn their microphones off, please. It's very important that we have microphones off, and I'll take questions afterwards. And so if you take this way, it's actually more historic and a little bit shorter. So I show that route there. That's an option for you. And it turns out there's a grocery store and a restaurant in Brecon. So planning ahead, you can save some time. This is about 1 day to make a stage and a quarter. It's an example of one time saving route. Here's another example. And this is around Bar-sur-Aube. This is the town of Bar-sur-Aube. Begin at Dolencourt, go to Bar-sur-Aube, and end in Bar-sur-Ville. Now, this is the profile of that stage. It means you're going to have a climb of 150 meters, another 150, and then a 200-meter climb in the space of the Dolencourt to Barrouville stage. And see what the stage is doing here. It's sending you up a hill to this town, downhill to Bar-sur-Aube, up another very, very steep hill to a lookout, and then down Bar-sur-Aube, and then down the hill to Barrouville. Well, it turns out there's a wonderful road right here, the D46, that follows along the river valley. There's a modern road, the D619, that also goes that same direction. So this is a very quiet alternative option. I've called it the bike option because it can also be used by bicycles. And in fact, in the book, I show a bike route that allows you to do from Canterbury to Besançon in just 16 days, if you choose to do that. This also works for walking, and it saves this crazy ladder-like climb that's right here. So again, this is something you can do if you plan ahead. If you're using just the Via Francigena app, you don't see that this can work easily for you. All you see is this official route. So I've watched, and what people will do is they have the Francigena app, and then they also have Google Maps. And Google Maps doesn't tell you about the quality of this road that's quiet or flat. It just looks like an alternative. And it doesn't compare that to this road. If you find yourself walking on this road, I mean, I feel sorry for it. This road is pavement, but it's quiet. This is pathway, but it's quite hilly. So in my mind, you should plan ahead, and you should, in order to make this work for you, it's best to have resources that describe the various options for you. Now, I already mentioned the app. The VF app is good. It shows you one recommended route, and that's the official route. But there are also ways that by using additional resources and common sense, you can do better than the Francigena route. Let me give you an example. This is the stage from Trèfle to Cicerone. This is the picture that you get in the app. And look at what's happening here. You're walking all the way to Saint-Quentin in order to get to Cicerone. Well, yes, you can do that. It's the official route. That red line here on the book is this red line here. I've identified for you a bikeable route that's on the D32 and D738 that you can quickly get to Cicerone. There's also, thanks to my friend at Trèfle, there's also a very smart walking route that you can see is on country or farming roads here. It's not on the road after it gets to Sevi. And that also cuts off this big triangle to Saint-Quentin. Now, that's a great town. It's beautiful. It's a lovely place to be, but it adds about almost half a day for you to walk all the way to Saint-Quentin. It's a nice lunch stop. It's a great overnight, but there are shorter ways for you to go that are just as good. You miss this nice big city, but it helps to achieve the goal of reducing your time on the route. So let me give you another example. Now, the stages at the start of France are Calais, Ouessant, Guin. And this is what Guin looks like. On the official route, even though Guin is a stage end, the route doesn't take you there. So it sends you through this forest, and then you end up having to walk down this busy road and back. Well, you can also either continue on to Leek if you want, or you can shortcut from Calais to Guin, and that actually saves you an entire day. I don't necessarily recommend it because I love that walk from Calais to Ouessant, but it's there for you. And the nice thing about working this way is you can see what's required of you. I also show you in the next stage how you can walk this route from Green to this road in order to get to Leek. So there are lots of options along the way, and the app is good. It's limited to just the official route, which is equivalent to the GO 145, which is there for the purpose of getting you into the woods and into the greenery, not necessarily to getting you to roam in your 90-day deadline. So that's why it's smart to really understand where you're going. Now, tip number 4, I want to share a slight contradiction of what I've just said, and that is that shorter is not always better. And it's easy for you to cut off some of the best parts of the Francigena just to save time. So I was already talking about Calais. You've landed on the ferry in Calais. Now, the Via Francigena is based on the route of Archbishop Sidgwick in 990. Calais was not a port in 990. Ouessant, which is way over here, was the port. In the next 200 years, it silted over and Calais became the main port. So now to get to France, you have to go to Calais. But the Francigena takes you faithfully, loyally to Ouessant. And you walk from over here, Ouessant, then to Wien. But you can see, you can walk on this Velour des Marais. This means bicycle route of the swamp. That's what Marais means in France. So this will take you through the flatlands alongside the canals and get you to Green. What you miss is this. This is what the walk looks like. This is just after Calais, and this is just before Ouessant. You're coming down here off of the bluff, and you're looking out at this bluff, and Ouessant is in this bay. But these colors earned the area the name the Côte d'Opale, as in the opal coast. These are the colors of opal gems. It's a beautiful area. This turquoise, frosty white color of the sea. I've never seen it anyplace else. It's beautiful. And so if you shortcut, you miss this. You've saved about a day, a full day, but at a price. Another example is the Chapeau de Saint Louis. Now, you can start at Leek, and if you want to, you could theoretically walk on the D217 all the way to Turnham-sur-Laham. But the official route takes you up this hill to the settlement of Ewes, and then across a dirt road to this chapel. And I believe this is one of the highlights of the Francigena in France. It's a ruined church in the middle of nowhere. It was rebuilt to its current state in the 20th century. It's a gorgeous place. And you only see it if you walk the official route. If you decide to follow Google Maps and you shortcut, you happily get to turn a hem, but you miss this. If you want to miss it, fine. Just at least know what you're missing. And yeah, you could be down here in Goemi and walk uphill and back downhill. But at the end of the day, you're unlikely to do it. In my mind, it's worth a few extra kilometers to see this site. Tip number 5. Here it is, 35 minutes after the hour, and we're already on tip number 5. And that is use the chambre d'hôte system. Okay, so you don't speak French. Chambre is room, d'hôte of hospitality. Essentially the system that allows you to have access to a room in somebody's house. So it's commonly believed that in order to make it on the Francigena in France, you have to camp, but you don't have to camp if you use the chambre d'hôte system, because there's a whole infrastructure of people who are ready to host you. Here's my host in Ours. Here's my host in Amet. Here's my host in, take me a second to remember the name of the town near Arras. Here's my host before Bourg-le-Bussier. Here's my host family in Orsnay-l'Hôpital. Here's my host in the town of Dampierre-sur-Salon. And these are relationships that I built by virtue of using the chambre d'hôte system. So I have these friends from the Francigena, and the case of every one of them, except one, they made me dinner and breakfast each of the nights. And if I'd asked them, they also would have made me lunch. In the case of Ahmed, Paulette here opened the kitchen to me, gave the ingredients, and I fixed my dinner for myself. She's not cooking anymore for her guests. And so this is a key part of the infrastructure, but understand it's put together by a group, the Fédération Française de la Via Francigena. This is the FFVF, and they have created this accommodation guidebook. You can see mine is getting old. I bought it in 2020. There's a new version. It's put together in French, and also it's sold by the confraternity in its English language version. You can go to the store of pilgrimstorome.org and find this book. It's worth its weight in gold. And let me show you. So in the town of Amet, and you can see I wrote here, I was staying here on the 15th of that year. I circled that I was going to stay in this farm. It's a farm, but they have a adjoining apartment with 2 or 3 bedrooms. That's the address. Demi-pension means they will provide breakfast and lunch. It's available for you. This is their email address. That's how many beds. That's the price range. And there's the infrastructure that it has, kitchen, and they will do cooking for you. So my process is, my French is good enough. I call and ask if there's a bed. If your French isn't great, you can email Colette. That's Colette's name. Her husband is Jean-Baptiste. And you can email them using Google Translate and ask for a room. You can see that there is not anything else in Amet. And this symbol tells you where the different lodgings are. So there are listings for the entire Francigena in this booklet, from Calais all the way through Switzerland now. So it's worth it to buy this book. So that's not the only resource. It is, in my opinion, the best resource. And this is how you could get it if you want to go and order it directly from the FFVF. But Americans and English speakers, we've convinced ourselves that booking.com is the way to go. Well, let me tell you, I booked, for example, at Dampierre-sur-Salon. And as soon as I arrived, my host said, "Why in the world did you book at booking.com? You paid more money for your room by booking that way. And also, I get less money because I have to pay booking.com. So he said, book with me directly. And that's what you get if you use the booklet from the FFVF. Now, in France, you can also go to chambre-d'hôte.org, and these kinds of rooms in private homes are also listed here. And you can go to another site, Gîtes de France, and in a similar way, housing is listed there. But you're dealing directly with your host as opposed to going with something like booking.com. Another resource is via francigena.org, but I want to tell you that it's not fully fleshed out in France. And there are many places in France you're not going to find if you rely solely on the app or on the Via Francigena.org website. This is the book to get. So on Facebook, when somebody says, I can't find a place at such and such, my first question for them is, have you got this booklet? So I recommend that to you above all. Even if you don't buy a guidebook, buy this booklet for your accommodation. Let me tell you something else. There are a couple of stretches where there's not a restaurant or a grocery store for between 40 and 75 kilometers, in which case it actually is very helpful for you to have stayed at a chambre d'hôte, because you don't need a grocery store if they're doing breakfast and dinner for you. And you can ask them to put a lunch together for you too. So this is a problem of camping. With camping, you're carrying your own gear, but you also have to carry enough food, because if you're not staying in a chambre d'hôte, you're responsible in those stretches without a grocery store or restaurant for your breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So let me just review the tips. First is understand the goal of the GR145 versus the goal of the Via Francigena. They're identical in France because they have to be. That's the only way it could have been done in France. but the 145 is trying to help you have a green and natural experience, no matter if you're in a hurry or not. And sometimes you're done with the greenery and you just want to get there. So understand when it's sending you off onto the forest instead of giving you a straight track. Second, plan your route in advance. Especially if you're in a time crunch, look at the guidance that's available for you. My guidebook is an example. It's the official guidebook for the Francigena. I show you the official route, but I also recommend other paths. And there are other guidebooks in French and in English if you don't like mine. Third, the app is good, but in this case, I think the app is a good resource. I don't think it's enough for you, and you need to have other resources too. If a guidebook is too heavy for you, get it in the electronic version. If you're using the app, you already have your smartphone with you. Fourth is shorter is not always better, and that means you need to know if you're skipping or going quickly, what you're missing. And you might decide you don't want to miss that something. To me, Wissant is a great example. And third, use the chambre d'hôte system. It's economical, and in some cases, it's actually the best way for you to go. So if you want more information or to contact me directly, you can find me at sandybrownbooks.com. My books are available through Cicerone Press and through my website, but also through Amazon, through your local bookstore. And I should mention too, I've written on the Way of St. Francis from Florence to Assisi and Rome. I wrote the Cicerone Press Guidebook. It's one of Cicerone's top sellers every month on the Camino de Santiago. And I also wrote during COVID the California Missions Trail Guidebook because it was someplace I could get while I was not able to get to Europe. So there you go. That's my presentation for you. And I invite you to put your questions in the chat, and Eamon is going to moderate them for us. So Eamon, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. And Sandy, can I just compliment you on what is an excellent presentation, full of great tips. And you know, I should perhaps reveal a bit about myself, that I'm currently in stages walking the Via Francigena, and I'm fairly early on in France. And so just about 6 months ago, we did the Wissant walk, and I would recommend it. It is truly beautiful walking down along the coast there, although tragic as well. And those people who do the walk, I won't say more than that, but you will see what I mean by it's beautiful and tragic at the same time. So there are two things we can do. So people have been putting their messages and their questions into the chat. The other thing you can do is use the reactions button at the bottom, and you can use the raise hand. And I can't promise I'll bring you in exactly in the order in which you raised your hand, but what I will do is try and cover everybody, or and at that point, what we'll do is unmute you, and then get you to ask your question out loud. So we're going to start with what's already been written in the chat. Sorry, there's somebody coming in. Right, let's just start with what's in the chat already. There are already lots of answers in there, so thank you to Julia for doing that. And the first question that I noticed was, let me just find it again, is from Pete Carter. So we've done a lot of backpacking, and we've done a pilgrim walk with accommodation. What level of independence do you need to maintain on the VF in France, i.e. sleeping bags, tent, stove. I think you've covered that, but just you might want to just touch on that again.
Sure. Yeah. As I said earlier, the assumption is that you have to hike with a tent and camp on the Francigena in France. In my guidebook, I feel like I've given the necessary guidance that you don't need to do that. And armed with the booklet from the FFVF, there's really no need to bring camping gear. You're actually making it harder for yourself if you're not availing yourself of the chambre d'hôte system. So you'd have to bring food for a couple, 3 days sometimes when there's not a grocery store. So I recommend doing it that way. I think I'm a pilgrim walker in the tradition of the Camino, and I'm looking for an overnight in a bed or with a sleeping bag at most, and wanting to keep my gear light. And I'm aware of people that have hiked with camping gear. Almost universally, they get to Italy and they send their camping gear back with them because the infrastructure is even stronger there. So if you want to do it, it's possible. I should say it's not always legal. You should always contact private property owner, or you should check before you camp on public property to see if a permit is required. And to me, that makes it complicated enough that it's not the route I would choose.
And so I've been looking at the questions, and Julia, thank you. You've done some excellent answers in there. So what I'd like to do is just to jump into some of those that haven't been answered. And forgive me if I get this slightly wrong, because I've only got a small window I'm working on here. So Ferdinand has asked, I only have a week or so to walk, hike. Is there a section that you would recommend that's good for a week or so? I realize there are lots of options. I don't speak French or Italian, Spanish, which is closer to Italian. So I do speak Spanish, I think you're saying, and I consider myself a strong, experienced hiker. I've walked portions of the 2 routes of the Camino. So is there a particular area that you'd say this is the one that you would never miss?
Well, you could tell by the group hikes I'm leading this year that I have a preference for A, crossing the Alps, and B, walking in Tuscany. So if you're crossing the Alps, it takes, I think, about 10 days to walk from Lausanne to Aosta. And you wouldn't want to do that other than July and August and into September because of snow at the top of the pass. But for example, when I walked with my wife and we made our way up to the top of the pass, we got to the lake that's at the top of the pass, and she burst into tears. There'd been so much beauty that day already. And then we're surrounded by these granite peaks. And here's a lake, and we're looking from Switzerland to Italy. It's just so beautiful. And another example of that would be crossing the Apennines as you make your way from Fornovo di Toro to Berceto to Pontremoli, Aula, Sartana. That's very nice. That's coming out of Emilia-Romagna and into Tuscany, and then briefly in Liguria. Lucca to Siena is 6 days. And three of the best Tuscan towns are Lucca, San Gimignano, and Siena. So that's good for its own purposes. I've come to really love that stretch around Langres in France and Besançon on the way to Pontarlier. And so I think it's one of the best days is walking the June route from June to Orbe in Switzerland. You cross into Switzerland, you're in the Gorge de l'Orbe. It's gorgeous. So I'm giving you too many options, but I hope that, Fernando, you find something there that works for you.
So, Sandy, the next question, and I think I've left this in post because it's quite an important question, I think, for people who are not necessarily experienced in walking in Europe. Thank you for this. Do I need to be worried about not finding water in parts of France? What might I do in a water emergency? Also, does a paper map exist of the Via Francigena?
Water in France. I'm glad you brought that up because Italy is different and Switzerland is different than France. In Italy and Switzerland, there's water everywhere. Almost every piazza in Italy has a water spigot near it. And in Switzerland, as you're walking through the mountain villages, there are gushes of water coming in fountains. And it's all coming from glacier-fed springs and aquifers. It's all great to drink. In France, there are no water faucets for drinking in the places, in the squares. So you end up having to stock up in the morning and carry enough for the day, unless you knock on somebody's door and they're happy to fill your water for you, in my experience, or B, you stop by a cemetery. Every town has a cemetery, and every cemetery has a water faucet for watering flowers. And so you can drink from those water faucets. Also, I encourage you on your phone to go to an app such as, I'll find it for you. It's in my navigation folder. It's called Drink Stop. And Drink Stop app has a GPS function where you can find water fountains for drinking nearby you. I've included as many as I could find with my 2 eyes in the maps in my books, but I'm certain I missed them. And something like Drink Stop is a really helpful app to have.
So we're really at the end of our time, but I just want to ask one question. Mary has asked, are we likely to meet wild animals?
What a nice question. Yes, you are. And there are remote areas of France where you will see wild waterfowl and birds. They're delightful and non-threatening. You might see a small fox. You might see a deer or a raccoon or another animal. You might also see a wild boar. And sometime when we have more time available to us, we should talk about the strategies for wild boar. But essentially, they're not as dangerous as you're led to believe if you here for a couple of steps. First of all, remember they're very nearsighted, so they won't see you if you're 100 meters away. You'll see them first. Secondly, their sense of smell is really great. So they will smell you if you're upwind of them, and they'll get out of your way if they smell you. If you're downwind of them and get close to them, then you may frighten them, in which case you never go up close to them. You make sounds like clapping your hands. I sing Frank Sinatra songs out loud if I think they're nearby. And I'm trying to sing words that I know and have fun. And they hear me singing and they head for the hills. And so making noise is a strategy for dealing with them. You usually see their marks on the path where they're running. And if you're attuned to all those things, you're never going to have a problem with boars. Never get close to them, never surprise them, never get between a pig and her, or a sow and her piglets, because she'll be very protective. I've never heard a story of a person walking the Francigena and being harmed by a wild boar. So I wish we ended on something much more lighthearted than
Well,
that.
we have an opportunity to do that. So,
Okay.
I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us. This has been the first time, to my knowledge anyway, my experience, that we've done this. I'm looking forward to other opportunities where we can interview perhaps yourself, Sandy, again in the future, but also others that have great experience and bring that to our community. Not only are we doing this live, we're going to take the opportunity of recording it. We're having a few problems with YouTube and posting stuff at the moment to do it in the correct way, but we will solve those problems. It's just a matter of time. And the positive note that I want to end on is Sandy, just to ask you to sum up, I've loved the time that I've spent doing the Camino and the short few hundred miles we've done on the Via Francigena. But what for you is the very best thing? What's your really big positive? You've spoken about so many. You might want to select one of those, or perhaps bring something else in.
Mm-hmm. To me, the Via Francigena is unique among the emerging pilgrimage trails because it's international. So, UK, France, Switzerland, Italy, the Vatican, and there are subcultures in all those places. You walk through territory that was destroyed in World War I, and you see gardens growing there now. You see the French flag next to the European Union flag, and cemeteries where tens of thousands of people were killed in World War I. And the cultural experience is phenomenal. We are walking through Europe, but also the scenery is phenomenal. And you can take a train or ride a bus or drive to all these places. But when you walk through them, you feel them in you, the soles of your feet. You sense them in your nostrils and your taste buds because you've experienced them up close with all your senses. And the mountain ranges crossing the English Channel, the vast farmlands of France, the beautiful hilltop villages of Italy, the vast forests, and then the people that you meet. This is a fabulous experience. If you can, walk the Francigena. for the full 3 months, along the whole breadth of it. It's a life-changing experience.
And at that, Sandy Brown, thank you. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you to everybody that joined us. Please keep an eye on the website. When we get around to doing another one of these again, which I hope will be quite soon, we'll give you plenty of notice. So thanks, everybody. And that's us for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Eamon. God bless all.
God bless everybody. Bye-bye.